Right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Today is the second class. We'll focus on on two principles: the principle of knowledge and the principle of understanding. So, the principle of knowledge or insight. Now, in the previous principle, we discussed really what the background we go to whenever we want to find answers, and that's Quran and Sunnah. Now that we know where to go, we need to know them. We need to understand what's contained in them as well. But we also want to know what we're trying to achieve in our dawah. So we need to know what we are inviting to. We need to know who we are inviting and how to give them dawah. And this type of knowledge that comes during dawah is very different than the type of knowledge that's theoretical, where you would watch a video or read a book. This one requires practice. This is where the real test is. So first point is to know what you are inviting to. Because if you don't have a clear picture of what you're trying to achieve or what are the main topics that you're discussing, this will make it easy for you to lose track of the conversation. Which brings us to a slight point on the side, that the Prophet ﷺ explained the entire Quran. There's nothing in the Quran that he did not explain to the Sahaba. We can't claim that there's texts in the Quran that we don't know their meanings. And this is relevant because sometimes a person may tell you that, this topic is unaddressed, or we don't really know what happened there. Basically making some form of claim that a part of the understanding of the revelation is lost. And we don't believe in that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ. We have sent down unto you the reminder and the advice, which is the Quran, so that you may explain clearly to the people what was sent down to them. And of course, to explain the Quran, you need to understand it first. You need to work by it first. Otherwise, you're just acting like the previous nations, like the Jews. These people, they had the Torah, and they did not really convey what's contained in them. They just had it sitting there. Another important thing is that knowledge has to always come before speech and action. There is one of the chapters in Sahih Bukhari. It starts with the chapter is titled "Knowledge Before Speech and Action." Now, when you're giving dawah, mostly it's coming out of religious zeal, of religious piety. But that by itself is not enough. It needs to be backed up by proper knowledge. The reason for that, it's easy for a person to fall for emotion. They follow how they feel about something instead of having a clear understanding of what is contained in the Quran and the Sunnah. And when you are lacking the clear opinion about something that is known in the Sharia and you promote your own view, that's a problem. If it's correct, you made one mistake because now you promoted something that you didn't know about. And if it's wrong, you did two mistakes, that you promoted something that you didn't know about and also false information. And the Prophet ﷺ said, بَلَّغُوا عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً. بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً. But that verse that you're promoting, it needs to be something that you know as well. If you don't understand it, if you don't fully have a proper understanding of how it's achieved, how can you propagate it? You will tell someone you need to do this, and then they ask you, what does it really mean? And then you can't explain. So that's a problem. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لِذَنْبِكَ. So know that there is no God worthy of worship other than Allah, and ask forgiveness for your sins. So it's compulsory for us to know that there's no God worthy of worship other than Allah. It's compulsory for us to have this knowledge and to work by it. And another thing is that it's very important for us to understand what we're trying to achieve. We're acting as an instructor. We're acting as a guide to other people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ عَلَى بَصِيرَةٍ أَنَا وَمَنِ اتَّبَعَنِي. So I invite with sure knowledge. That knowledge I'm inviting others to, I'm very sure of. It's not something that I'm still understanding or have a problem with or I'm being hesitant about. And whoever follows me is also on that sure knowledge. Now, many times a person may be asked something and they think it's compulsory. And in reality, it's only recommended, or the other way. And when you're doing that, you're misguiding others. You're making things harder for them. If it's an obligation and you tell them that it's not, now you're sinful because that person will simply not do it and it's on you. If it's a recommendation and you tell that person that it's an obligation, now that person will start doing it and he's going to feel sinful about leaving it out. And there are many stories about this. For example, I remember a sheikh told me that somewhere in India, when they would pray Isha, many people would want to pray Qiyam. So they would pray 8 rakat and then they would pray the witr. So 9 rakats. After some time, these people lost the information. They no longer remember why they were doing that. And they thought it was part of the Isha. So whenever they pray Isha, it was 13 rak'ah. 4 rakat, then four prayers, each are 2 units, and then al-witr. And they were doing that for a long time until one of those people, a student, he moved to Saudi Arabia, and then he was surprised, why are people not praying Isha 13 rak'ahs? And when he asked, he came to realize that this was qiyam and that people simply forgot that knowledge. So what happened is something that was recommended, it became obligatory because that person they asked, he thought that he knew that this was an act that is compulsory or obligatory. And what happened is that, no, in reality, it's just highly recommended. Another example, when a person doesn't really understand what an innovation in religion is, one would say, don't listen to the Quran through a tape recorder. And I would ask him, why is that not allowed? He would say, this is an innovation. Now, when we talk about innovation in the Islamic context, we mean an innovation that happened out of, that is related to the religion, not a worldly innovation. So that person, for him, using microphones, for example, during prayer is haram. Speakers, haram. Maybe even recording is haram, because now that's not the way that's normally conveyed. But it's just him not really knowing the difference between a worldly innovation and a religious innovation. Now, another extreme on the other side of this equation, a person would say, when there's the adhan, instead of having someone recite the adhan, no, we'll just play a recorder. And the reason for that, well, it's the same output, right? It's the same adhan that's being pronounced, and everyone is happy, and no one really needs to go to the minbar, turn on the mic, pay attention to the timing, all of that. But now they are missing on the fact that this is an act of worship. Giving the adhan is obligatory upon the community. And if a person says that instead we're going to be having the recorder do it, it means that you're basically saying this act of worship, I'll be recording, and that's it. For example, if I need to pray, maybe I can record myself pray and play the video. It's not the exact, it's not as bad, but it's on the same line. You're just mixing up what a religious innovation is and how you would use a worldly innovation. So again, these things need to be cleared up. A person needs to understand what they're promoting and be very patient in understanding this knowledge. If you learn something, make sure that you fully learn it. Don't be in a rush. Don't try to gather up and pile up as much information as possible, because you need to digest all of this information. You need to act upon it. You need to go the extra mile with it. And you don't want to jump around sharing pieces of information that you don't really understand yet. The second point of knowing is knowing who you are inviting. So every person has their own way that they would be attracted to the speech, that they have their own way of accepting the message. A person may be very interested in an emotional conversation. You talk about emotions, how they make you feel, these things, and for them, they are sold. Another person, no, he's more of an intellectual. He wants to listen to reason. He wants evidences. A third person might simply be arrogant. He doesn't really want to listen. And then every type of these people, there's a different speech, there's a different context that the message needs to be conveyed in. For example, another person you meet, a very pious man, you won't have that much effort with them. They are looking for the truth. If they know, for example, they're doing something wrong and you correct them, they will simply accept it and work upon it. If it's a sinner, well, you will require a stronger amount of what we call targhib wa tarhib. You take them between hope and fear. If they are sinful, you remind them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful. Because if that person is doing so much sins and so desperate to come back, it's going to be very hard for him to hear more about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishing people. To him, he's already among them. And he's just affirming that fact. So sometimes you need to lift that person up and try to get him closer to Islam by focusing on the part of hope. But of course, if you see a person sinning, well, that doesn't make sense, because if he's sinning and you tell him Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Rahman ar-Rahim, Ghafur rahim, that person will simply think, well, I'll do the sin and carry on, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may forgive me. Another interesting type that you may sometime meet, and this is more specific to maybe open mosques or in a Dawah booth or in a public debate, which are Orientalists. Now, these people, they're well versed in the Middle Eastern culture and in the sciences surrounding them. So mostly the Islamic scholarship. They're familiar with the Quran, familiar with the Hadith, familiar with Arabic as well. And these people were specifically trained back then, a few decades ago, to help the invaders basically control people. If you want to control people, you need to understand them. If you don't understand them, and for example, you go to one of those Arab countries, you start speaking English, or you wear very untraditional clothes, they will simply not like you. They can see the clear difference between you and them. So these Orientalists, they were trained to understand those people. And among the things that they were trying to destroy is simply Islam. For them, Islam is that big pillar in the way of invading the Middle East. So these people, when you're talking to them, many times they either think that they know and they don't really know, or they know and they are just hiding these facts. Because admitting the facts that make your position stronger is rarely done when you're talking to someone that's opposing you. For example, a Christian talks with a Muslim and he tells him, oh, your understanding of God is much stronger, it's much more consistent. It just doesn't make sense. So what they do is they look for gaps, or at least what they think to be a gap, and they attack you with it. Which brings us to the next slide. So types of ignorance. SubhanAllah, I forgot to edit to do part. Anyway, it's done. So there are two types of ignorance. There's simple ignorance and there's compound ignorance. When you're starting to talk with a person and you want to basically find which one of the two are they. If it's simple ignorance, it means that there's something they simply don't know. And when you ask them about, they remain quiet. For example, you ask a person, what's the distance between the Earth and the Sun? The person will say, oh, 1,000,000 kilometers. But he doesn't really know. Maybe he remembers some piece of information long time ago, and he just repeated it. He doesn't really know if it's true or not, but to him, it's better to give an answer than no answer. Now, that's a compound interest. That's the more dangerous one, because that person, he doesn't know. Deep down, there's a good chance he knows that he doesn't really know what's going on, and they're still going to argue. He's still going to promote his beliefs, and you can see that with pretty much all the other sects: atheists, Hindus, Buddhists, Christians, all of these people. Many times when you ask them about their beliefs, they think that they know, or maybe they don't. They admit that they don't know, but they are fine with it. And that's even worse than compound ignorance, because compound ignorance, normally they think they know and they promote what they think they know. But if a person doesn't know, for example, with Christians, when you ask them about the Trinity, they have no idea what's going on. But it's not simple ignorance. It's not compound ignorance. It's like the compound ignorance. They admit that they don't know. They are fine with that, and they're still promoting their belief. And that's among the worst things a person can do. Because what foundation do you even have? They're just driving the conversation, hoping for a person to, be of such, weak intellect, or they are just so emotional to the point that their intellect is just put on the side and they just follow what's being said. A very interesting hadith that I believe any person in Dawah needs to focus on and always remember is the hadith of Mu'adh radiallahu anhu, when he was sent to Al-Yemen. So the Prophet ﷺ gave him an advice. He was sent as a missionary to teach the people of Yemen about Tawheed. Now the Prophet ﷺ, first he told him, you are coming to a people among the people of the book. So call them to testify that there is no God but Allah, and I am the messenger of Allah. That's the first fundamental when you're giving a da'wah to a specific person. You need to know what they believe. If you start talking to someone, for example, you meet a person, you're not sure what he is, but you tell him, oh, Jesus is not the Son of God. It doesn't make sense. You don't even know if they're Christian. And this happened once before in front of me during one of the booths. That person was a Sikh. So Sikh don't have any belief in the Trinity. They do have other deviant beliefs about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when it comes to Jesus being the Son of God, that's not part of their belief. So what's the point? It just shows that you're lacking the knowledge, you're just speaking, and it also comes in a way that may offend the person in front of you. Like, you're here, you're taking part of my time to speak to me and tell me about Islam, but you don't even know my religion. So that's the first part. Always know who you're talking to. If you don't know, it's fine. Just, ask questions. Tell them, what do you believe in? How do you do this? How do you do that? For example, many times with Christians, sometimes when that conversation about the Son of God and Jesus, who really is, alayhi salam, is not very fruitful, you try to ask them other side questions. For example, how do you pray? How do you do this? What do you think about sins? Do you believe in the original sin? All of these things will be later used as an evidence against that person. Of course, you don't want to do it that way. It may offend the person because now you're just nitpicking. But you really want to understand what that person really believes in, and then slowly find the weakest gap and try to fill it with tawheed and so on. And at some point, that person will deep down realize that this is the truth. Now, the Prophet ﷺ said later, if they accept that, only if they accept tawheed, they accept that La ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, then teach them that Allah has obligated 5 prayers in each day and night. Only then tell them that there is 5 prayers. And the reason for that is obvious. If they don't believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why would they pray? There's no reason to them. It doesn't make sense. You're going to tell them, well, pray to who? To Allah. But I don't believe in him, right? The third pillar, which is zakah, only comes after. And this is very important because technically, once you're a believer, everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded is still compulsory upon you. But you still don't know these things. So for example, if I don't know that there is zakah, I've been a Muslim for 4 or 5 years, and it just happened that I never learned about zakah. Let's say I'm a new Muslim, very remote area, people really don't know much. But I've been praying, alhamdulillah. Now, when I gain this knowledge, I'm supposed to act upon it. But until then, I'm not sinful, and I'm not supposed to do it because it doesn't make sense. How can you do something you don't know of? But what's also interesting here is one would say, what if a person takes the shahada during Ramadan? Are we going to do the same steps? Now, this is slightly different because once it's Ramadan and you're literally in front of that person and he took the shahada, you can't hide that from him. He's obligated to fast Ramadan. If you hide it from him, well, he's not sinful, but you are sinful. Because when you're not telling him about the obligation of Ramadan, you're technically hiding something that is compulsory upon people. If you see your brother not knowing, for example, he believes in the shahada, but you don't tell him about salah, that's wrong. How can you not tell him? Same thing when it comes to Ramadan, because it's happening like right now or in a few days. you need to tell that person. But in the normal sequence, and this is not hiding, it's just the way that you're teaching people. You don't tell them all the information right now. You tell them bit by bit. And at the very, very least, it's going to be shahada, then prayer, then zakah. But the only two exceptions I can think of would be Ramadan, because you can't make the person fast for next year because he's new Muslim. That's not a thing. And the unfortunate situation where a woman would take the shahada and her husband is not a Muslim. Technically, on that very spot, once she takes the shahada, she's in the iddah, which is like the time between talaq till she's really no longer his wife and it needs a new contract. But this requires a scholar to discuss. But again, when you take the shahada, for example, of a woman, now I can't really say if you should tell her right away. If you do that, there's a very good reason. She will just move on. There's a very good chance. There's many of them, alhamdulillah, they do know beforehand. Maybe it's becoming some kind of common knowledge among women converts, I'm not sure, but sometimes they would ask that question up front. This woman became a Muslim and she's married to a non-Muslim. What happens now? And if their iman is strong, alhamdulillah, it's going to be easy. But if their iman is weak and they start thinking about the family, what I'm going to do now, many of them will simply either give up on Islam, or decide. I mean, that would be the worst. If they remain with that person, it's going to be a relationship of zina. But that's definitely better than becoming a disbeliever again. There's no question about that. A person who is doing kaba'ir and still being a Muslim is times and times better than a person who is a disbeliever, who is not committing any sins because he believes in morals, but not in the one that created morals. All right, third point regarding knowing is how to give dawah. And this is an acquired skill. It takes time, it takes practice, it takes many situations. Again, this is not, we don't want to focus on the obvious ways of dawah, but any type of dawah. So how do you give generally dawah? There's some main etiquettes that we want to stick to. First of all is to be patient. There's no question about that. If you expect that you're going to tell a person something and they will act upon it the next day, that's the exception. It rarely happens. It'd be very nice, alhamdulillah, because that person, deep down, he is a person who's looking for truth. He submits to it. He doesn't try to, go around in circles, but that's not the norm. So we don't expect immediate results. We hope for them, but if it doesn't happen, we carry on with our mission. Also, it helps you meet have proper expectations. In the dawah, things can be very, very frustrating. You would talk to a person, you tell him everything, I believe in this, I believe in that, blah. Then you tell him, why aren't you a Muslim? Why don't you become a Muslim? And once they hear that, all the beliefs that they were just, acknowledging to them, it becomes a matter of doubt or hesitation. So again, be patient, be respectful. Many of the people, they will say things, whether they intentionally do it or unintentionally, that is against Islam, that's offensive to a Muslim. Now, it requires wisdom. I'm not saying don't ever respond. No, sometimes you need to be firm. You need to tell them this is not appropriate, whether it's a Muslim or a non-Muslim. But generally, what we're going to be sticking to is to be patient and to be respectful. Another very important thing is to be clear. We want to avoid any dilution around the message. We don't want to circle around it. And this is different than being straightforward. We still want to be, we want to deliver what we have in a way that does not make things awkward or offensive, or the person's going to feel pressured. You don't want to be too straightforward. Many people don't feel comfortable with that. And also, it's not very kind. You meet a person, you tell them, oh, you're a Christian. According to us, if you don't believe, you're going to die as a disbeliever and you go to hell forever. How many people are going to listen to your dawah? Very little. So what's the point? Yes, you did deliver the truth. You were clear, but you were straightforward in a way that made that person doesn't even want to listen to you, right? وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. If you were harsh and your heart is rough, people will just move away and be far from you, distance themselves from you. So being clear means that you have a message, you want to deliver it. Another extreme example. So it's normally the truth is in the middle, and there's one extreme and there's another extreme. So the extreme of being clear, one of those extremes is to be very straightforward. Another extreme is to dilute the message so much the person, after they listen to you talk, they don't know what they are supposed to do. For example, one time a couple of Christians came to our street Dawa. They were very eager to know about Islam. So normally how the conversation you wanted to go, you start to build up like a good foundation, focus on the common things. It's not compromising, it's just the reality of that conversation. You want to focus on what is common until you focus on the very main thing that differentiates us from them. Now, when I overheard the conversation, it was mostly, you have something that's shining and you're trying to advertise for it. Instead of focusing, like that's Islam basically, instead of focusing on what the importance of Islam is and why they need it, you keep circling around it, you keep telling, random facts, some trivia. Although in the Quran, there's a specific dialogue that's targeting people of the book. If you're talking to one of them and you don't mention it at all, or you mention it very briefly to the point that person, after they leave, they are unaffected by what you said, or basically you didn't give them the reason why they need to become Muslims, then that means we didn't do our part. We just told them random facts about Islam. This is the Kaaba, this is this is that. But where's the benefit? Like, okay, now they know that there is something called the Kaaba. To them, it's just trivia. They are not Muslims. They don't need to know about these things yet. If they know, the chances that this is going to be useful to them is very little. Another important thing is, if you don't know something, say I don't know. And again, this can happen when you in street dawah, in talking to a non-Muslim, or just with Muslims. Many times a person will ask a religious question, and if you don't know the answer, say I don't know, it's fine. For example, if a person says, when a woman is on her period, does she need to make up for the prayers? And the person would say, yes, of course, these are prayers. She can't miss them. So she has to make up. Well, that's his opinion. Did he go back to the Quran? Did he go back to the Sunnah? Did he go back to the narrations of the Salaf? He didn't do any of that. Did he even go to any of the books of fiqh? No. It's just how he felt about it. Is that the right approach? Of course not. This is the religion of Allah. This is not his personal project. He needs to not do that. And finally, we need to be wise when we are sharing the knowledge and how we are sharing them. And the one part, sometimes it can become problematic. For example, a person that is in a rush, a person that wants to, is angry, he's not in an emotionally stable state. When you talk to him, the chances that he will listen to you and pay attention is not very good. If he's in a rush, he's just going to agree with you, nod, and end the conversation and leave. Instead, you can just offer to him, we're here every Saturday, please come back, or take his number and contact him. Or if you see him on a regular basis, then you're good. You don't need to rush it. Like with Dawah, you don't want to rush things. You want them to take a natural path. Because if you rush them, that person very likely is already being overwhelmed. People today are not like back then. People used to be very religious, even if they were disbelievers. They were very close to the religious side of things. Today, especially in the current society, that part doesn't exist. To them, even just talking about spiritual things will make them go wander for days, because they are all surrounded by all the materialistic values. Another important thing here is the debating. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah wal maw'idati al hasana." وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. So invite people to the way of your Lord with wisdom and fair preaching, and argue with them in a way that is best. Okay, so controlling ourselves during Dawah is important, because many times when you are engaged in a debate, there's two major types of debates. There is debating for yourself to become victorious. This can happen with the ignorant, so you're talking to someone who doesn't deserve your time, or even with the knowledgeable, and now you're just belittling his knowledge. Instead of you receiving the information and benefiting, no, you're just trying to win the argument. And this is disliked, of course. This is not what we want to do. Whether it's with a Muslim or a non-Muslim, doesn't matter. What we want is, our intention is to give advice, is to spread the knowledge, and is to prove and to show what is true and expose what is false. If these things are not the driving factor, that's a problem. So if the goal is to prove what is true and expose what is false, if it's with the appropriate opponent, a person that you're actually able to have a conversation with. For example, you talk to a person and that person is just being disrespectful, lots of hate, lots of anger, maybe say a few dirty words in the middle of his sentences. You don't want to engage in a debate with that person. He needs to work on his manners first. Your time can be used better somewhere else. So this is when it comes to debating. Focus on your intention. Focus on that what you're doing is to give advice, to spread knowledge, to expose what is true, and to show what is true and expose what is false. Another thing is that you want to also avoid any unnecessary speech. And this is very general. This is not really related to Dawah only, but it's something that you want to practice in your daily life. When you talk about things that are unnecessary, or discussing things that are of no use, or very low benefit, this is a problem. Because this kind of speech, it makes the heart rough. And this other was mentioned by Imam Ahmed in a book called Kitab al-Zuhd. He said that Hassan al-Basri, rahimahullah, one of the great tabi'een, he heard a few people arguing, and it was the kind of argument that was just a waste of time. For example, as kids, one would ask you, which came first? Is it the egg or the chicken? There's no use of that question. Like, what are you going to do now? It's just some philosophical question where you're going to keep thinking, and then, well, I don't know. I was not there. So here, this kind of arguing. So his commentary on that was that these people, they became bored of worship, because otherwise they won't be wasting their time. And when they get bored of worship, the speech becomes light, because now they are no longer thinking about the consequences. When their worship is not intact and they start speaking, it's very easy for a person to deviate, to say things that he should not speak in. And as a consequence, their piety has decreased, and this is why they speak. This is why they are arguing about things that are useless. And if you were to look into the books of philosophy, if you were to look into many of the previous nations, what are the major intellectual matters that they discussed? Most of it is an absolute waste of time. If you look into the Christian theological debates or books about who Jesus is, who God is, what are morals, all of these things, it's just like it's a brain exercise where they think that there's no truth, because to them, they don't go back to Al-Quran and Sunnah. For them, being a philosopher and thinking is the equivalent to them as it is to us with the Quran and the Sunnah and the prophets. They just keep thinking, they come up with new ideas, and they waste everyone's time. Same thing you see with many of the deviant sects in Islam. They will go extreme with matters that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not expect us to indulge in. For example, among the major ones are the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we're not going to even go into that. But just as a high-level commentary on them, on how they interpreted these things, They took the books of philosophy, like we discussed last time, and they tried to apply it and ingrain it into the Islamic scholarship. And what happens now is that they're just not really following the Sharia. They're following the Sharia of the philosophers. They're following the Sharia of the people who really know how to waste their time. They think it's intellectual, but when you think about it, it's really not. You already know the answer, or you don't need to know the answer. And this is for any Muslim. It's important to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us seek useful knowledge and to avoid knowledge of no use. Knowing for the sake of knowing is not a thing in Islam. It is in the modern world, where you will see lots of questions, lots of people asking about things that are simply unimportant. But as Muslims, we focus on what benefits us, even when it comes to knowledge, because there's lots of knowledge out there, and many of it is simply unimportant or even harmful. Now, knowing by itself is not enough. Knowing is different than understanding. Many times you think that you already understand something, let's say a hadith or a verse. And when someone explains it in a different context, you'll figure out, oh, I've always misunderstood this. This is the first time that I really understood what it meant. So of course you're understanding what you are, knowing, but is it the right understanding? Well, that's a matter of, study. It's a matter of taking your time, not really depending on your own understanding in many things, but especially in religious matters, really, to seek the opinion of scholars and understand these things from the Quran, the books, and so on. And an interesting thing that I believe most of you already know, that the word fiqh itself means understanding. Later, it developed to be its own, science of Islamic jurisprudence related to the act of al-mukallafin, those who are obligated to perform acts. But fiqh, before that, was generally used to mean understanding anything, and it include everything in all the Islamic sciences before that division happened. And like I said, a mistake in someone's understanding, which can be compound ignorance, can be more dangerous than a mistake due to ignorance. Because think of it this way: you have a piece of paper, and there's lots of things written on it. Now, that's a person who has a mistaken understanding. What they need to do is two things. They need to wipe out what they wrote and then write something new. While a person who doesn't know yet, the paper is still white. There's nothing written on it. He just writes and he's good. So this is a reminder that when we're seeking knowledge, again, the knowledge we're gaining, we want to be slow with it. We want to ensure that we have a deeper understanding of it. If there is any things that are unobvious, don't rush it. Let the knowledge sink in and benefit from it as much as you can. Now, inshallah, I think 2 or 3 more minutes, inshallah, and we will be done. So this is an interesting example that I always think of when I think about the difference between understanding, knowing and understanding. So there's this famous hadith in Sahih Muslim. إِنَّ الْمَيِّتَ يُعَذَّبُ بِبُكَاءِ أَهْلِهِ عَلَيْهِ. Now, when a person reads it, it says that the deceased is tortured or punished, depending on who translates it, because of his family's weeping over his death. Now, a person, when he reads that hadith, he will think that this is a problematic hadith. To him, it's a contradiction. And to him, it contradicts with two things. It contradicts with his intellect, because that person just died. Why would he be sinful? Why would he be punished by the acts of his people who are genuinely, sad about him? That's the first part, the intellectual evidence, and also the evidence from the revelation, which is the verse in Surah Al-An'am, وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. No one will reap except what they sow. So to him, this hadith is problematic. There's a contradiction between these two. So we need to first go back to what we know for sure. What we know for sure is that Quran never contradicts with itself. It never contradicts with authentic hadith. And same thing, authentic hadith never contradicts with authentic hadith. So the problem would be what? It would be my understanding. And here it would be also the problem of the person translating. But if we stick to only the Arabic text, the word yu'adhab means torture. But many times torture is meant as punishment. For example, people who are in hellfire are tortured. And the torture is a punishment. But is it always a punishment? No. For example, if you are sick, it doesn't necessarily mean that you did something wrong, that you're sinful. It can be just an ibtila from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is a form of torture. Because you're sick, you can't move, maybe you can't pray the usual way, you can't get out of your bed. So that kind of torture, in reality, is not a punishment. And this hadith had many scholars, subhanAllah, I believe Imam al-Shafi'i, maybe even some of the tabi'een, they considered it to be mukhtalaf al-hadith, meaning that this is among the ahadith where when they put it with the other contradicting ahadith, they couldn't make sense of it. They were not able to do jama, like basically collect them together and have one understanding that when you apply to this hadith works, you apply to the other hadith works. But again, in reality, what it said here, that the person who dies, when his family weeps over him, he is in a state of torture, not as a punishment. But when you see, for example, your kid crying and you can't make him stop, it's a kind of torture. It is a form of torture, not necessarily a punishment. And you didn't do anything about it because that kid can be simply crying without you, making that happen. And you're not sinful for that. And same exact thing with the deceased. When a person dies, his people cry about him. What would they do? People would tell them, don't cry, he's now being punished because of you. But why would he be punished? He didn't do anything wrong. I mean, he's dead. The only thing that's left for him would be his good deeds or bad deeds that are still active, or a person that is supplicating for him. So that's among the things that we want to ensure. If there's a contradiction we find, something does not make sense, it would be our understanding, not the revelations. Alhamdulillah, that would be it for the second and third principle, the principle of knowing and the principle of understanding. Any questions